And joining us in studio is energy expert and political analyst Tshepo Kgadima. And we also have Wayne Duvenage. He's the chairman of the Organization Against Tax Abuse. Let's start with you, Kgadima, and thanks so much for your time. The thing is, talk about enterprising, or rather privatization of SOEs. It's not the first time. We've seen attempts of partial privatization not working previously. What are your concerns with the latest call?
Yeah, you're quite correct. The call is not new. In fact, if we look at this country, 1996 to 1999, the talk of the day within government circles and business circles was really the privatization of state-owned enterprises. And we saw various attempts, one of them being the sale of South African Airways. 20% equity was sold to Swiss Air, which the sale was since reversed. But needless to say that that sale, it was an unhappy relationship. Of course, Swiss Air then ended up selling back its 20% to South African Airways, or to the South African government, at the time following the 9/11 terror attacks in the United States. But needless to say that that didn't work. So if we hadn't learned, we also saw with Aeroporti di Roma of Italy buying another 20% in AXA, the airports company of South Africa. Needless to say that that didn't work. We saw even a management contract that was given to the New Zealanders in South African Post Office. Needless to say that hundreds of millions of rands in management fees were extracted from South African Post Office, and South African Post Office was not left in any better shape. And then lastly, I want to mention also the other sale, which happened of 30% to the Tintana Consortium, which was SBC Telecoms as well as Telkom Malaysia. That, when you look at the end of the day who controlled the cash flows within Telkom, you say, was that a happy relationship? Was it a happy experience? I'm saying to you it wasn't. So this calls, I can safely say to you, based on the needs of this country, going forward over the next 30 to 50 years, it would be absolutely dangerous for our economy to embark on a course that already we know the results of. It was Confucius, the great Chinese philosopher, who said, study the past if you determine the future. And I would say anybody who's advocating for the sale, particularly, partially or otherwise, of a very critical state-owned company such as Eskom, or even South African Airways, needs to really go and look at the history. And what is the history? There's a book that was authored for Eskom under the supervision of Alan Morgan and the former chairman, Dr. Ruel Khoza. It's called The Symphony of Power. And I say that anybody who's within the management of Eskom, or anybody who is has got shareholding interest in Eskom, they would do well by going to go and study that historical account of Eskom, and they would come to the same conclusion that it is absolutely foolhardy to even suggest breaking up these companies and privatizing them.
Wayne Duvenage, chair of OUTA, thanks for joining us. Just your counter arguments as to why privatization should be considered, as our analyst says that it tends to sway more in the favor of the foreign investors.
Well, I think from an SAA point of view, I don't see any problem with privatization. I think it'll be very good for the airline. You look at Air New Zealand, it's partially privatized, a very similar sized airline to SAA, similar number of routes, doing almost 50% more in seats and passengers, and it is profitable. This airline of ours is not operating in a monopolistic environment. It is propped up by government. But if it was privatized or semi-privatized, I think we would find that it would be managed and run more professionally. It would not rely, or could not rely on bailouts then if it is partially privatized, and it would be healthy for the airline. As far as Eskom goes, I think that is a bit of a dangerous situation to privatize. It is a monopolistic entity, and it needs to separate the distribution from Eskom, and Eskom needs to allow private competition to come in, as opposed to privatizing or selling off Eskom. Eskom needs to become a low-cost producer. It isn't at the moment. It is causing serious damage and harm to this country, and something has to be done. But I don't think privatization of a monopoly of that nature is going to be the solution.
So you don't think that the overhaul of leadership and the capacity, ensuring that we have the right skill set and the right vision to take the SOEs forward is an option? You're rather leaning towards partial privatization, at least in the case of SAA?
I'm saying privatization, partially or even fully in SAA, yes. It would be very sad to privatize a monopoly like Eskom. But leadership does need to change. Eskom's leadership is dire, and it needs to be sorted out, as does SAA's, and privatization would help with SAA. But Eskom is a different kettle of fish. It needs to go back to how it was producing in the past with good leadership, good audits. They are struggling at the moment.
Your response, Tshepo?
Look, my view is, let's talk about South African Airways, or even both of them. It is more telling for me that somebody, a businessman of the caliber of Mr. Christo Wiese, would then make the call such as was reported by Bloomberg. What does it tell us? It actually tells us that these are more valuable enterprises. Economics 101, elementary stuff. You buy low, you sell high. Why would you want to be selling assets at a lower price? Because right now there's a perception that is created so that the value or these assets are devalued and bought on the cheap. Is that in the interest of this country? I'm saying no. The approach should be, which is more pragmatic, is corporatization. And we are in no different. In fact, there are case studies we can look at from Australia, from New Zealand, and in recent history from China. It is important to note that China only had corporate law in 1994. If you look at 2016's Fortune Global 500, you look at the number of Chinese companies, 20% of the Global 500 is made up of Chinese companies. And when you look at the ownership of those companies, are companies that were corporatized. So going forward, to allow the private sector to play is not the privatization or the partial sale, which invariably amounts to management control being taken by the minority shareholder who controls the cash. It is important to note that the word profit is an opinion by an accountant. It is not fact. If you look at the cash generative capacity of an enterprise such as South African Airways, clearly the talk that, oh, this is bankrupt is really driven by nothing other than mischief, in my opinion. And I'll tell you why. The 5 billion that currently they say is needed, what is it needed from? Is the result directly from a accounting principle called the mark-to-market, which simply says at the end of the financial year, you value your assets, and based on whatever those assets will be valued for, should you be selling them, this is what you get. So SAA is now being put in a situation where they say it is insolvent. It is not insolvent, and it is not the only company. We can give many other case studies. IBM is one such company that was affected by the mark-to-market principle. General Electric, a multinational, one of the titans, a behemoth globally, also was affected by this. A few years ago, another company that was leading, Babcock & Brown, equally was declared bankrupt based on the mark-to-market, because the mark-to-market principle does not factor the cash generative capacity of the enterprise. SAA's assets are not for sale, but they've been valued less than the liabilities that they have, hence the requirement for this guarantee. But the airline itself is able today, in the current circumstances, is able to meet its cash flow, as well as it's able to service its debts as they become due and payable. So therefore it cannot be true that it is near bankrupt.
Wayne, your response to that?
No, look, SAA is technically bankrupt. If it doesn't get bailouts from government, it is not going to be able to fly. So quite frankly, we don't even need this airline. When you think about it, we operate in a very competitive environment. There are other airlines operating profitably in South Africa. We do not need to have a flag. It's a nice thing to have on the tail of an aircraft that fly around the world. But really, the public cannot continue to bail this airline out. It is bankrupt. It doesn't have the funds and the cash flow to continue unless it is run properly, profitably and professionally. And that's the problem with this airline, is that it is not run by people who understand how to run airlines as it used to be. And so now we have this predicament. So really, you can't say that airline is running in a profitable situation. And profits require money. It can break even, but it requires the funds to keep it afloat, and that's not going to happen unless the government bails it out.
Okay, let's look at historical experiences going forward with Bain and Company, Coleman, Andrews at the time being in key positions, including technical, operational, finance, etc. We know how that particular marriage ended, looking good on the books that the company's making money. Meantime, there was no inventory, all sorts of logistics sold off. That is a bad example of partial privatization. What other options are there?
Is it to me?
Yes, sir.
Look, I mean, there's different arguments with what Coleman Andrews did. Sometimes it's the right thing to do is to sell off assets and lease them back to get cash positive again. Quite right now, we do lease a lot of our aircraft at SAA. What needs to happen is the cash flow needs to improve, the passenger numbers need to go up, the utilization of those aircraft need to be done properly and professionally, and that's the problem with this airline. So right now, its current predicament is lack of leadership.
All right, let's look at what policymakers are saying, particularly when it comes to possible engagements with investors. Tshepo, any talks on the table at the moment that you're aware of regarding the shedding of assets of SAA?
Yeah, look, my view is this. What this government needs to do, it needs to come up with a firm strategic policy of ownership that is growth focused instead of balance sheet focused. Purely because of the examples that I have given. For as long as you look at, you have a balance sheet bias approach to ownership, you end up in a situation whereby the state-owned enterprises in a developmental state, such as South Africa, is not able to achieve those objectives. So you need to move to a growth focus. And the way to move to a growth focus business model for all our state-owned enterprises, particularly those that are key for the development of this economy to grow at the 4 to 6% level as espoused or as set in the august goals of the National Development Plan, you need therefore to change that ownership model. And there are many examples or case studies that we can be able to refer to whereby a growth focus approach to ownership has certainly worked, and whereby the private sector comes in not to compete, but comes in at a level of investment and all other technical. So, for example, look at Eskom. A lot has been said about even the refusal, or they are saying they're not going to continue to sign the independent power producers from renewables. My view is that the independent or the renewable energy sources are an expensive religion that we can ill afford as an economy. And there's enough data to back that up. All the contracts that have been signed to date, the power purchase agreements, all of them, there is not even one that is below R1 per kilowatt hour. When the inherent generating cost for Eskom from their recent annual report is sitting at 77 cents per kilowatt hour. So certainly this is not viable, and the government needs to take a firm policy, energy policy, that is underpinned, in my opinion, on 3 pillars. That is reliable supply of electricity that comes from base load, that is cost effective, that you need to be a low cost producer. So I agree that you have to drive cost at all levels, and thirdly, in terms of environmental friendliness. And environmental friendliness, by the way, does not mean replacement of fossil fuels. It means you burn fossil fuels in an environmentally more sustainable manner, and there are clean coal technologies that Eskom can be able to apply. But going the renewables route, I agree with them that is not sustainable and is not in the interest of our economy to go that direction.
All right, Wayne, of course, this is a lucrative business when it comes to energy security. We're talking about Eskom and its leadership, Brian Molefe being hailed as the king of lightness, if you like, because there was the darkness. He kept the lights on. And now you were saying that essentially that is also flawed and it needs to be investigated. Wayne? Oh, I think we've lost Wayne Duvenage. We had Wayne Duvenage from Outer, the chairperson there. But interestingly, again, Tshepo, let us go back as to who has got their eye on this particular asset called Eskom. Christo Visi, as you were saying, multi-billionaire. He is the richest man in SA, if not top of the list in terms of the richest people in the world. Independent power producers is what is at stake here. So are you saying that the call is being made because there are already technologies and products that have been developed that need to be absorbed somewhere?
Yeah, but what should we be doing? Instead of us, the Department of Energy now spending in excess of 2.5 billion rand subsidizing the generation from renewables, that money would have been better served if it was put into research and development to ensure that at some time in future, because fossil fuel sources are depleting, at some point in time they're going to reach a finite age. You therefore need a situation whereby that 2.5 billion rand, it would have been put in research and development. The United States today, they are putting so much money in at MIT, which is the University of MIT, at Harvard, and a number of other universities to do research and development of storage solutions so that you can get to scale of base load for those to then be able to store energy generated from renewable sources. And when that race, whoever that is going to win that race is the country that is going to control the entire world. And South Africa is renowned for innovation. We know about the gas-to-liquids technology that Petro SAS, we know about the coal-to-liquids technology that Sasol has. Most certainly, we should have been the ones leading the race, and government would have been doing better by putting the 2.5 billion in research and development than financing this religion.
Okay, Tshepo Kgadima, energy expert and political analyst. Thanks.